Welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. Sometimes losing someone who never valued you is the first step toward gaining everything you deserve. And sometimes the universe has perfect timing for showing people exactly what they walked away from. My name is Russell, and this is how my wife divorced me after 13 years, claiming I couldn't give her the life she deserved, and how everything changed after 3 months. I'm 42 years old and own a residential and commercial HVAC installation and repair company. I started the business from scratch over a decade ago, building it from just me and a truck to a team of 8 technicians. It generates solid income, which is comfortable but not extravagant. I married Christine after dating for 2 years. She has always seemed impressed by my entrepreneurial drive and ambition to build something of my own rather than working for someone else. The early years of our marriage were genuinely good. We rented a modest 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood, had our son when we'd been married for 3 years, and built what seemed like a stable middle-class life. Christine worked part-time while our son was young, and we split household responsibilities fairly naturally around our work schedules. But somewhere around year 7 or 8, I started noticing changes in Christine's attitude about money and lifestyle. She'd gotten her real estate license and started working as an agent, which exposed her to homes and lifestyles that were significantly more upscale than ours. She began making friends with other agents and clients who lived in larger houses, drove luxury cars, and took elaborate vacations. Christine started making comments about how our house was too small, how our cars were outdated, and how we never went anywhere exciting. She'd compare our lifestyle unfavorably to her friends. These comparisons became increasingly frequent and tinged with resentment. Her real estate career was inconsistent at best. Sometimes she'd close a sale and bring in a good commission, but at other times, she'd earn almost nothing despite spending considerable time and money on marketing, open houses, and client cultivation. The unpredictability of her income made financial planning difficult, but Christine resented any suggestion that she should consider more stable work. The real problem started about 3 years ago when Christine began spending beyond our means with increasing frequency. She'd buy expensive clothes, claiming she needed to look successful for clients. She'd insist on dining at upscale restaurants where other agents might see us. She'd book spa days and salon appointments that cost hundreds of dollars. When I'd express concern about these expenses, she'd accuse me of being cheap and not supporting her career. I tried to be reasonable about finances while running a business that required constant reinvestment in equipment, vehicles, and employee costs. I paid myself a salary that allowed for comfortable living, but also maintained reserves for slow seasons and unexpected expenses. This practical approach to money management seemed boring and insufficient to Christine, who wanted to live like we earned twice what we actually did. Our arguments about money became increasingly bitter and frequent. Christine would accuse me of being unambitious, of settling for just a small business instead of expanding aggressively or pursuing opportunities that could make us wealthy. She'd say I was holding her back from the lifestyle she deserved, that she'd married me expecting more than I'd delivered. I'd counter that we had a good life by any reasonable standard, but Christine had stopped measuring our life by absolute standards and was fixated instead on relative comparisons to people who earned more or spent more freely. The emotional intimacy that had characterized our early marriage eroded completely under the weight of these financial conflicts. We stopped having meaningful conversations that weren't about money or complaints. Our physical relationship declined from active and affectionate to occasional and mechanical. We were living as hostile roommates who happened to share a child rather than as partners building a life together. Our son, who was 7 when these intense conflicts started, couldn't help but notice the tension. He'd retreat to his room when Christine and I started arguing, and I'd see the stress in his face when she'd make cutting remarks about my work or our lifestyle during dinner. I tried to shield him from the worst of our conflicts, but you can't hide marital dysfunction from a child who lives in the middle of it. The fights reached a breaking point after our 12th year of marriage. Christine had taken a 2-week vacation to Hawaii with her realtor friends, spending about $4,000 we hadn't budgeted for. When I expressed frustration that she'd made this expensive decision without discussing it with me, she exploded. She said she was tired of asking permission to live her life, tired of being married to someone with no ambition, tired of settling for mediocrity. I told her that if she was so unhappy with our life together, maybe we should consider whether staying married made sense for either of us. Instead of backing down or suggesting we work on our problems, Christine agreed immediately. She said she'd been thinking the same thing, that maybe we'd grown apart too much to fix things. Over the following months, we had several more conversations about potentially separating. Each time, Christine seemed increasingly certain that divorce was inevitable, while I kept hoping we might find a way to rebuild what we'd had. But her resentment had become too deep, her comparison to other people's lives too ingrained, for any real reconciliation to happen. Christine told me she'd consulted with a divorce attorney and was planning to file. She framed the decision as entirely my fault. I hadn't given her the life she deserved, hadn't been ambitious enough, hadn't supported her dreams of a more affluent lifestyle. The irony was that Christine's own inconsistent real estate income had contributed to our financial situation, but she never acknowledged her role in our circumstances. The divorce process was surprisingly cold and businesslike. Christine didn't fight for custody of our son, which shocked and hurt me. During our initial custody discussions with our lawyers, she suggested that our son should primarily stay with me, since I had a more predictable schedule, and he was already established in his school and activities near our house. She wanted every other weekend and some holidays, the absolute minimum involvement. It felt like Christine viewed our son as a burden rather than a priority. She never talked about missing him or being sad about seeing him less. She focused entirely on the financial settlement, dividing our limited assets, determining whether either of us owed spousal support, splitting what little we had in savings and retirement accounts. The financial negotiations were contentious, but ultimately straightforward. Christine's attorney pushed for spousal support, but since we'd had similar earning capacities during the marriage and Christine had career potential as a realtor, the judge declined to award any. About 4 months after Christine first filed, our divorce was finalized. I got full custody of our son, with Christine having visitation every other weekend. Christine moved into an apartment closer to the wealthier areas where her real estate clients lived. My son and I stayed in our house, adjusting to life as just the two of us. The first few months post-divorce were emotionally difficult, but practically manageable. My son struggled with the change, asking questions about why his mom had left and whether it was somehow his fault. I tried to reassure him that adult problems weren't his responsibility while being honest, that his mother and I had grown apart in ways that made staying married unhealthy for everyone. Financially, I was actually better off after the divorce. Without Christine's unpredictable spending, I could budget more effectively and even start rebuilding savings that had been depleted by her expensive habits. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I received a phone call that would change everything. A lawyer called my business number, saying he was the executor of my aunt's estate and needed to discuss some matters with me. My aunt was my mother's younger sister, who'd moved to California decades ago after marrying an older businessman. I'd met Aunt a couple of times in my entire life, mostly at family events when I was a child. She and her old businessman husband had never had children and lived quietly in Santa Barbara, running several successful real estate investment properties. The lawyer explained that my aunt had passed away the previous month at age 73 following a stroke. Her husband had died about 5 years earlier, leaving everything to my aunt. And now, my aunt's will has named me as the primary beneficiary of her estate. I initially thought this might be a scam, one of those calls claiming you've won money or inherited from a distant relative if you just pay processing fees. But the lawyer provided specific details about my aunt, about my mother, about family history that a scammer wouldn't know. He invited me to his office to review the will and estate documents. I made the drive to his office the following week, still half convinced this would turn out to be a mistake or misunderstanding. But sitting in the lawyer's office, reviewing authenticated legal documents, I learned that my aunt had indeed left me virtually her entire estate. The total value was staggering, approximately $13 million. This included several commercial and residential properties that generated rental income, a diversified investment portfolio of stocks and bonds, and about $2 million in liquid cash and money market accounts. The properties alone were valued at over $8 million. The lawyer explained that my aunt had always liked me, though we'd rarely interacted. She'd followed my business career through updates from my mother and had been impressed that I'd built something from nothing rather than looking for handouts. She'd apparently told her husband years ago that if she outlived him, she wanted to leave their wealth to family members who'd worked hard rather than just distributing it equally among relatives. I sat in that office feeling like I was in a surreal dream. $13 million. More money than I could have imagined having across my entire lifetime. Suddenly mine, because an aunt I barely knew had decided I deserved it. The immediate aftermath was a mixture of shock, disbelief, and overwhelming relief. The lawyer walked me through the legal process. The estate was already through probate, and I'd need to sign paperwork to begin transferring assets. There would be estate taxes to handle, but the net amount I'd receive would still be over $11 million after all fees and taxes. I drove back that day in a daze, my mind spinning through the implications. This money meant financial security for my son's entire life. It meant I could expand my business without debt or even retire young if I wanted. It meant I'd never have to worry about money again. But I also felt a deep sense of caution. I'd seen stories about lottery winners and inheritance recipients whose sudden wealth destroyed their lives through poor decisions, opportunistic relatives, or people coming out of nowhere with demands. I decided to be very strategic about how I handled this windfall. I told only my mother and my brother about the inheritance initially. I explained that I wanted to keep it quiet while I figured out how to manage the money responsibly. I hired a financial advisor who specialized in sudden wealth management and a lawyer who dealt with estate and asset protection. Together, we developed a plan for integrating this money into my life without making drastic, attention-grabbing changes. My first priority was debt elimination. I paid off the loan I'd taken. I paid off all my business loans and vehicle loans. I established a trust for my son's education and future needs. I invested the majority of the money conservatively in diversified holdings that would generate passive income while preserving capital. I did make some visible improvements to our lives, but I tried to avoid ostentatious displays that would draw attention to my changed financial circumstances. Despite my caution, word somehow got out. I suspect it happened through my mother, who probably mentioned my aunt's death and the inheritance to other family members in casual conversation. From there, information has a way of spreading through social networks. About 6 weeks after I'd received the inheritance, I got a call from Christine. We'd had minimal contact since the divorce beyond coordinating our son's visitation schedule. Her voice had an edge I recognized from our marriage. She asked directly if it was true that I'd inherited money from an aunt. I confirmed that, yes, a relative had passed away and left me some assets. She demanded to know how much, saying she had a right to know if it affected child support or other financial matters related to our divorce. I told her the inheritance was none of her business and didn't affect our divorce settlement or any obligations I had to our son. She became aggressive, accusing me of hiding money during our divorce proceedings, claiming I must have known about this inheritance when we were settling our assets. I explained calmly that my aunt had died 2 months after our divorce was finalized, and that I'd had no knowledge of being named in her will. The timeline was clear and documented. Christine didn't believe me or didn't want to believe me, insisting that I must have concealed family wealth during our marriage. The call ended badly, with Christine threatening to contact her lawyer about my hidden assets. I reported the conversation to my attorney, who advised documenting everything carefully in case Christine tried to make legal trouble. 2 weeks later, I was served with legal papers. Christine had filed a motion in family court claiming I had concealed marital assets during our divorce proceedings. Her filing alleged that I'd known about family wealth tied to my aunt's estate and had deliberately hidden this information to avoid sharing it in our divorce settlement. I was shocked not just that she'd found out about the inheritance, but that she was actually trying to claim it legally. The audacity was breathtaking. My attorney assured me that Christine's claim was legally baseless. Under Arizona law, as in most states, property inherited after a divorce is finalized is separate property of the inheriting spouse, not marital property subject to division. The timing was absolutely clear. But Christine's lawyer was pushing hard, filing lengthy briefs arguing that the inheritance must have been arranged or known about during our marriage, that family wealth should be considered in post-divorce modifications, and various other creative legal theories that had little basis in actual law. The court scheduled a hearing. I had to spend thousands of dollars on legal fees fighting a claim I knew was meritless, but couldn't ignore. My lawyer prepared extensive documentation, the complete timeline of my aunt's death, probate records, her lawyer's testimony about when I was first contacted, and proof that I'd had no contact with my aunt for years before her death. The hearing was held before the judge who'd actually handled our original divorce case. I sat in the courtroom with my attorney while Christine and her lawyer presented their arguments. Christine's attorney claimed I must have known about my aunt's wealth and intentions, that I deliberately rushed our divorce to avoid sharing this windfall, that the timing was suspiciously convenient. He demanded that the court reopen our divorce settlement and award Christine a portion of the inheritance as marital property she'd been wrongfully denied. My attorney systematically destroyed each argument. He presented the timeline showing that my aunt died months after our divorce was final. He showed that I'd had virtually no relationship with her and no knowledge that I was in her will. He cited clear Arizona case law establishing that post-divorce inheritance is separate property. He noted that even if I had known about my aunt's wealth, anticipated future inheritance isn't marital property subject to division. The judge listened to both sides and then delivered a decisive ruling. She stated that the law was absolutely clear. Property inherited after a divorce is finalized belongs solely to the inheriting party and cannot be claimed as marital property by a former spouse. She noted that Christine's attorney had provided no evidence suggesting I'd known about the inheritance during our marriage or had done anything improper. Then the judge went further. She said that Christine's claim appeared to be frivolous litigation motivated by regret about our divorce settlement rather than any legitimate legal basis. She warned that filing meritless claims to harass a former spouse or attempt to grab assets one has no legal right to could result in sanctions and attorney fee awards. The judge dismissed Christine's motion entirely and ordered that each party bear their own legal costs. I felt overwhelming relief, not just that I'd won, but that the legal system had worked exactly as it should. Christine's attempt to steal money she had no right to had failed completely. But I could see the bitterness on Christine's face as we left the courtroom. She'd gambled that a sympathetic judge might reinterpret the law in her favor, and she'd lost. Now she knew for certain that I had millions of dollars she'd walked away from when she divorced me, and there was nothing she could legally do about it. I thought that would be the end of Christine's attempts to access my inheritance. I was wrong. 2 months later, I received another legal filing. This time, Christine was petitioning for a modification of our custody arrangement. She was seeking primary physical custody of our son, with me having visitation. And, naturally, she was also requesting child support payments reflecting my improved financial circumstances. The transparency of her motives was almost insulting. Christine hadn't shown meaningful interest in increasing her time with our son over the past years. She rarely called him during the week, sometimes canceled her visitation weekends, and never attended his school events or medical appointments. Now suddenly, she wanted primary custody, not because she developed a burning desire to parent, but because custody meant child support, and child support meant access to my money. My lawyer filed a strong opposition to Christine's petition. We documented everything, then presented my son's excellent performance in his school, showing he was thriving in my care with strong grades and positive teacher reports. We showed that I'd restructured my business to prioritize his schedule, that he had a stable home environment and strong support system with me. We demonstrated that Christine's sudden interest in custody appeared timed precisely to her discovery of my inheritance rather than any change in our son's needs or her parenting capacity. The custody hearing was scheduled some months later. This time, Christine had been coached to look like a concerned mother fighting for her child rather than a money grabber chasing support payments. Christine's attorney argued that my son deserved to have equal time with both parents, that Christine's career had stabilized, allowing her more flexibility to parent, and that children benefit from strong relationships with both parents. He claimed that I was using my superior financial resources to monopolize the boy's time and exclude Christine from his life. My attorney presented our evidence. School records showed I'd attended every parent-teacher conference, while Christine had attended 0. Medical records showing I'd taken Damien to every doctor and dentist appointment over the past years. Activity registration forms where I was listed as the emergency contact, and Christine's contact information was often blank. A calendar documenting the visitation weekends Christine had canceled or cut short. Then my lawyer addressed the child support issue directly. He noted that Christine's petition seeking custody modification came immediately after her failed attempt to claim my inheritance. He pointed out that her sudden interest in more parenting time corresponded precisely to learning about money she might access through child support, not to any change in our son's circumstances or needs. The judge asked Christine's attorney to explain why she was seeking this modification now rather than at any point in the previous year. The lawyer gave vague responses about Christine's evolving feelings and improved career flexibility. The judge looked skeptical. Then the judge asked Christine directly if she wanted to address the court. This was Christine's opportunity to explain her motives and make her case for why our son should live with her. Christine started speaking in what sounded like a rehearsed speech about how much she missed the boy and wanted to be more involved in his daily life. But when the judge asked specific questions about the boy's school, his friends, and his current interests, Christine stumbled badly. She didn't know his teacher's name, couldn't identify his best friend, and wasn't sure what sports or activities he was involved in. The judge began explaining that the court's primary concern was my son's best interests, not the parents' preferences, and that the evidence clearly showed he was thriving in my care. She noted that Christine had essentially abandoned custody during the divorce and hadn't sought to modify that arrangement until I received a financial windfall. Christine, apparently frustrated that things weren't going her way, interrupted the judge. She started talking over the judge, saying this was unfair, that the court was biased toward fathers with money, and that she deserved to have her son living with her. The judge stopped speaking and stared at Christine. The courtroom went completely silent. Then the judge said firmly that Christine would not interrupt the court, that she needed to let her attorney speak for her, and that this behavior was inappropriate. But Christine kept going, her voice rising as she insisted she had rights as our boy's mother, and that this whole process was rigged against her. She said she knew the system favored men with money, that I was probably paying off everyone to keep her from her son. The judge's expression hardened. She told Christine that she was being held in contempt of court for disrupting proceedings and disrespecting the court's authority. She instructed the bailiff to take Christine into custody. Christine looked shocked, apparently not believing the judge would actually follow through. She started to leave the courtroom, probably thinking she could just walk out, but the bailiff moved to block her exit. Christine tried to push past, and the bailiff took her arm, explaining she was being detained. The scene was surreal, my ex-wife being physically restrained by court security, while her attorney tried to calm the situation and apologize to the judge. The judge was unmoved, ordering that Christine be held in the courthouse detention facility until she could appear before the judge again to address the contempt charge. After Christine was removed from the courtroom, the judge delivered her ruling on the custody modification petition. She denied Christine's request entirely, finding no change in circumstances warranting modification of the custody arrangement. She noted that my son was clearly thriving in my primary care, and that Christine had shown no meaningful increased involvement that would support giving her more custody time. I left the courthouse feeling vindicated, but also somewhat saddened by how far Christine had fallen. She destroyed our marriage chasing a lifestyle she thought she deserved, then abandoned meaningful custody of her son, tried multiple legal maneuvers to grab money she had no right to, and finally been held in contempt of court for losing control during proceedings. Christine was released from detention later that afternoon after appearing before another judge and apologizing for her behavior. She was fined and warned that any further disruptions would result in more serious sanctions. I haven't heard from Christine since that custody hearing. She still has her scheduled visitation with Damien every other weekend, though she continues to cancel or shorten those visits with some frequency. The boy seems to have accepted that his mother isn't going to be a primary presence in his daily life. The inheritance has given me freedom and security I never imagined having. Looking back on the past year, I recognize that Christine's decision to divorce me was probably the best thing that could have happened. If we'd still been married when my aunt died, Christine would possibly have had a legal claim to half the inheritance as marital property. Her spending habits and resentment would have made managing that money a constant source of conflict. The inheritance would have kept us trapped in a toxic marriage rather than providing the freedom it's given me. Her attempt to steal that inheritance through legal manipulation failed completely because the law was clear and the timeline was undeniable. Her attempt to grab custody of a son she'd abandoned failed because judges see through transparent money grabs disguised as parental interest. Every effort she made to access money she'd walked away from only resulted in legal defeats and public humiliation. If you're going through a divorce with someone who seems motivated primarily by money and lifestyle rather than genuine partnership and family, know that their choices will reveal their character. Someone who abandons their child when there's no financial benefit, but suddenly wants custody when money appears isn't apparent. They're an opportunist. Don't feel guilty about protecting yourself and your assets from people who've shown they don't value you beyond what you can provide. The law exists to protect legitimate property rights, and courts generally see through transparent attempts to manipulate the system for financial gain. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply living well with the freedom and resources that someone else walked away from because they didn't recognize their value. Christine thought she deserved better than what I could provide. The universe showed her exactly what she'd rejected, then made absolutely certain she couldn't touch it. That's justice, and it's enough.